Welcome back. The race for the White House is coming to the Washington area. Next week is Super Tuesday, the so-called SEC primary, a mammoth contest that will see voters in more than a dozen states cast ballots, Virginia being one of those states. Joining us now here in the studio, John Whitbeck. He's head of the Virginia Republican Party. It is good to see you. Thanks very much for your time. It is amazing that this dynamic contest that has so captivated the country. I mean, the ratings for the debates from the beginning through this moment have been in territory that we don't typically see. This is not C-SPAN political junkies or whatever watching because they always watch. This contest has grabbed the imagination of the country as a whole, and voters in Virginia are about to play a significant role. We get past the Nevada Republican caucus and the South Carolina Democratic primary, and it's on. We're heading headlong into Super Tuesday and this 14-state day of voting that Virginia participates in.
Well, it's even more significant for us as Republicans because we know mathematically we can't win the White House without winning Virginia. So at this primary, if we can pull the record turnout that we think we can, we're going to really have a tremendous amount of data. We're going to have a lot of enthusiasm and everything we need to win Virginia in November.
So as chairman, you're officially neutral. All these people are running to represent your party in November. How do you navigate a situation like this where passions are high, the interest is high, and at the end of the day, I'm guessing you want the candidate not so much who aligns with your personal political views as you do the man or woman with the best shot of winning the White House. That's what this whole thing is about.
Well, I want both. But, I want both. But, you know, look, you hit the nail on the head. We're navigating through, it was a large field. I think we're 17 candidates, 13 on our ballot. You know, we're down to 5. And because we only have 5 right now, we're seeing them everywhere in Virginia. I mean, John Kasich was here yesterday all over Virginia. The Rubio campaign is very active. The Carson campaign is very active. Cruz and Trump have been crisscrossing the state through both surrogates and their staff. I mean, there are some really hardcore operations going on in Virginia right now, and people are taking it very seriously because after March 1 and after July when we have the convention, we become one of the 5 states that will determine the next president. And they get that, and I think that's why we're seeing so much attention.
How do you win Virginia? How do you do well here?
Well, I think we haven't done a great job in the last few years.
But I don't mean in the general. I mean in the primary. How does a primary candidate?
Right. Well, and I think Virginia has a very good mix of Republicans. I mean, we have a lot of folks that identify with Washington, D.C. because they commute into D.C. They're very in tune. They're federal workers. They serve on, they work on the Hill for Republican members.
So Fairfax Republicans.
Correct. Fairfax Republicans, Loudoun Republicans, Prince William Republicans, and then you have in Richmond. You have, sort of those that are focused on the General Assembly, and they sort of live in that world, and they live in the. Then you have Southwest, which they're decimated by the coal industry being torn down by the Obama administration. You have the folks in Virginia Beach, and all these areas are so different from one another. And the candidate that can understand how to run a race in each one of these little microcosms across the Commonwealth is going to be the one that wins. And we're seeing all of them take very seriously each of these very different regions and traveling around the state.
Would Donald Trump or Ted Cruz pose problems for candidates down the ballot, for Republican candidates down the ballot?
I think it's a great question, and that's something that we certainly think about. But I feel sorry for the Democratic National Committee Chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I mean, there was a Politico poll came out a few hours ago that said that the #1 word to describe Hillary Clinton was dishonest, and the #1 word to describe Bernie Sanders was socialist. I mean, she has to navigate these two. One of them is under FBI investigation. One of them is saying, we're just going to give everything for free. The government's going to pay for everything. That's a much harder job than trying to determine whether or not Trump, Cruz, Rubio, whoever will affect down ballot races. And I'll tell you, it's certainly not going to affect here in Northern Virginia the Barbara Comstock race. It didn't matter who runs for president. She is a force to be reckoned with and is going to win re-election pretty easily.
That was a fabulous pivot. You should play in the NBA. That having been said, there are folks out there in great number who, including many in your party, who wonder about, and I think it's fair to say worry about, what someone as unusual as a Donald Trump with the great passion that his supporters bring, but an incredible unpredictability. He's constantly out there sort of like without a net.
Yeah.
His critics say he's taken positions on both sides of many issues, and there's just the raw nature of his appeal. Ted Cruz, running as an unabashedly conservative guy, could hurt you in a place like Fairfax County. 1 in 7 Virginia voters lives in Fairfax County.
Yes.
So it's got to be an issue. Don't call it a worry if you don't want to call it a worry. Call it something else.
Right.
But it's out there as something that people are talking about.
Well, and my point in pivoting to the Democratic side is it really doesn't matter who we nominate. The problem is so bad on the other side. It's such a Hillary Clinton has imploded. Her campaign has imploded. I mean, she's dispatching former President Clinton to Virginia, which is supposed to be her sure thing. Terry McAuliffe's his term as governor has been about electing her president. And she's having to run ads and send her husband in to campaign for her in Virginia because it's not a sure thing anymore. So we could nominate any one of the 5 remaining candidates, and I believe we will beat Hillary Clinton if she's the nominee in November. And we're certainly going to beat socialist Bernie Sanders if he's the nominee.
Can you talk about the statement of affiliation, and particularly for folks listening to the conversation now who live in the district or Maryland or who have come to D.C., the D.C. area from a state where people register by party? That's the norm in many places. It's not what we have in Virginia. Does that mean that anyone who self-identifies as anything, Republican, Democrat, Independent, Socialist, Green, whatever, can participate in any of in either party event March 1?
That's right. I mean, we're an open primary state. I mean, anytime you select a state-run primary to nominate the presidential candidate, you are essentially saying that anybody can vote, Republican, Democrat, whatever. And that was the reason for the statement of affiliation. RNC rules require that if you have an open primary state, you try to take some precaution to make sure that Democrats are not swamping your primary to vote for a certain person. But
the idea being, forgive the interruption, but the idea being that a Democrat who participates in the Republican primary is doing so not because they're drawn to the candidate, but to make mischief.
Well, and that's kind of what we've seen in the past, but now we're seeing...
How do you know?
Well, I mean, we have numerous examples of where we knock on doors in the subsequent election. Somebody who voted in a Republican primary, say in 2012. In 2013, we knock on their door. Because that's the only way we figure out who our voters are, other than phone banking and door knocking, is who votes in Republican primaries. We knock on their door and they say, I don't know why you're knocking on my door. I'm not supporting your nominee. I'm a Democrat. We think, well, the reason we got you is because you were identified as a voter in the Republican primary. But this time around, because Hillary Clinton's campaign is in such trouble and Bernie Sanders has a legitimate shot at winning the nomination, we think that there's going to be Republicans voting in our primary and Democrats voting in their primary, because Hillary and Bernie supporters are going to want to make sure that their vote counts for whoever it is that they're supporting. And it's going to be awesome. It's going to be awesome to watch what happens.
And so does that mean that, and forgive me for not knowing this, does that mean that the statement of affiliation issue went away?
Yeah, it was rescinded several weeks ago by a vote of the State Central Committee.
The issue of having to show voter ID, that's being challenged. Your view on that is what?
Oh, I supported Mark Obenshain's bill that he got through the state Senate to be able to require voter ID. I mean, considering what we know about the Supreme Court and how much at stake in this next election, and with the unfortunate death of Justice Scalia, this is an issue that's even more at the forefront, because Democrats, if they appoint a liberal Supreme Court justice, they can start challenging.
I'm sorry, the photo ID, having to show maybe
to vote. Well, yeah. what I'm saying is, I mean, this is an issue that in Virginia, I mean, this is a requirement now, but it's not a requirement that could stick around if the Democrats win the presidential election, because they appoint a liberal Supreme Court justice. Democrats say that this is a discriminatory, it keeps people from voting and it disproportionately impacts certain groups, and it doesn't. It's a requirement to make sure that the integrity of the balloting process is intact.
Professor Stephen Farnsworth has said that Virginia would be the ideal state to go early in the process. I mean, it's been Iowa, New Hampshire, as long as anyone can remember, even though these are two of the least diverse states in the nation. You move a state like Virginia up, and I realize that the entire establishment is baked in against anyone trying to crash the party, so to speak. But wouldn't Virginia be an idea given the diversity of not just racially, but in almost any way you can look at? Wouldn't Virginia be a fantastic early state? I mean,
absolutely,
and I mean really early.
Absolutely, you make a great point. My friends in the RNC that I'm a member of are not going to be happy in Iowa and New Hampshire, but I do agree with you. I think we represent what's best about America, and we have folks from all walks of life. We have people who are born and raised here for generations, and we have people that are new. And all of them are Virginians, and we would be a great first carve-out state.
You know, and I realize it's naive to talk about any kind of change in the status quo, but when you look at how diverse the country is, and you look at how crazy unrepresentative the two states that have the lock on the process now are.
Yes.
Not that they choose presidents, but obviously there are candidates who drop out just because they didn't do well in one of the early states, meaning that every other voter who follows can't even have the option of picking some of these guys who flame out early, right? You and whoever the head of the Democratic Party is now should really get together and make a case, I think, for Virginia being one of the very first states in the nation, early in the process.
Well, it's really a party decision. I mean, we would have to change the Republican National Committee rules to get that done.
More power to you. John Whitbeck, head of the Virginia Republican Party, thanks for listening to my rant. Thanks for stopping by. Good to have you here, as always. We'll talk sports with Alex Parker next. Keep it here.